Okay, so thank you very much for coming over here. We have a presentation which is completely different from the previous one because we are going to talk about food and more precisely transparency in the food supply chain. So there will be Julian D and Julian M who will make the presentation, and Julian D is going to talk about the importance of tracking the food supply chain. I will talk about the technology, and at the end, we'll see how we do it in our product. Okay, so I hand over to Julian.
Okay, thank you. All right, so TraceOne has been around for a while. The company was founded 15 years ago, and we've been working on software for the food and retail industry. And what really strikes us is the cost of a recall. So on average, a recall costs around $10 million to a manufacturer company. So if you realize something is wrong in your products, it costs you plenty of money to communicate with the retailers, pay the penalties for that, which averages to $10 million. But if you have a look at what happened to Mars a few weeks ago, you probably remember that Mars had some plastic bits in their candies. I mean, the number is probably 10 or 20 times higher than that. The second consequence of a recall is what consumers can see. So this is the stock price of Chipotle. Chipotle is a fast food chain in the US, and in October 2015, they had an issue. The issue is E. coli. E. coli is a bacteria, and it was found in some of the meals served in Chipotle. Some consumers got sick. Hopefully nobody died, but tens of people got sick after eating in one of their restaurants. And what happened is that people realized that, and if you have a look at the search on Google, you can see that there's a huge peak right when the stock price fell. So it has a cost, not only a direct cost, but also an image cost for the consumers. So at TraceOne, we wondered how consumers felt about that. So we've surveyed consumers in the world, in Europe and in the US, and we noted that only 12% of consumers really trust safety of the food they're buying. 12% only. Well, some people answered that yes, they kind of trust the food, but 12% really trusting the food is really a shocking number. Same for quality. Only 10% of them really believe that the food they're eating has a wholeheartedly quality they can trust. We ask other questions to the consumers. We ask them if they feel it's important to know what's in their food. And I guess I could do a survey in the room. All of you would say, yes, we want to know what's in the food we're eating. The issue is that people say that they're not providing enough information. 62% of them say they don't have the information they need. And even more worrying, people said, 27% of them said they don't trust the information that is on the label. So even if you're a manufacturer who does a good job at communicating on where your food comes from, only 63% of the consumers are going to believe the numbers and the information you're putting in your labels. But, well, everything's not red. There's a light, or at least something that we can build value on, is the fact that more than 40% of the consumers we surveyed said they are willing to pay more if they get more information. Information about the ingredients, information about the allergens, the certifications. They want to know more about their food, and they're willing to pay for that. So that led TraceOne to build Transparency One. Transparency One is a social network for the food supply chain that allows brands to map their supply chain from farm to fork. So let's have a look at what we are talking about. If you're using traditional PLM software, product lifecycle management, basically if you're that pizza manufacturer, you know very well your direct suppliers, these two guys in green on the diagram, which is, I mean, good enough, and that's what TraceOne has been doing for 15 years, basically. But if you ask questions about who are all the suppliers involved in your network, what are the exact ingredients, what are the country of origin, is everybody certified, then you don't really know because, well, you can guess they are somewhere in that gray zone here, but you don't know who exactly is providing ingredients for your products. So when you are talking about that social network we are building, basically we are allowing brands to connect with their suppliers and their suppliers up to primary production and get visibility on who's involved in their products. So that allows you to answer to the first three questions. You can tell who are your suppliers, you can tell about the exact list of ingredients, make sure there is no allergen used in your products, and you can also answer about the question of the country of origin. I mean, in many countries now you can see on the product that the ingredients are coming from France if the product is sold in France, or from the UK if it's sold in the UK, etc. It's information really valuable for consumers. But what about certifications? So what we're doing is not only mapping the supply chain, but it's getting information on each of the nodes. So as you can see now on that diagram, it looks like everybody's green. So I've got certifications and information that looks okay for all of these guys, except that one supplier in red over here, which seems in trouble. So basically, in addition to visibility, we give you access to an overview of the risk and compliance throughout your supply chain. And you can tell that that guy in red is non-compliant with your policy. Maybe they're missing a certification. Now the question is, what do you do once you have that? Should you just be scared out and have no way to react to it? Well, we also allow brands to search and see how that guy in red is impacting the whole product. And we're discovering here that the pizza manufacturer has actually a second product. So let's say this is margherita pizza and pepperoni pizza, for example. Both of these products are impacted by that supplier by searching in the graph and searching for the impacts of it. So before we show you the demo and how it works live, I'm going to give the hand to Julien to tell you about the technology.
So how do we do this? We started 2 years ago by thinking about the technology that we could use, because we had a lot of experience in managing two-level relationships between retailers and their suppliers. However, we figured out that if we want to cascade this relationship, it becomes very, very complex, especially when you want to make search and when you want to make a lot of queries at the same time. Why is it difficult to do it? Because when you have a food crisis, everybody is going to query the database at the same time with the same questions. And at that time, you need to have a high-performing system to be able to do it. So when we look at the technology, we said our experience is based on two levels, past experience. And if you take a pizza, as Julian described, if you just describe the pizza at two levels, you would have at the second level the dough, the tomato sauce, and the mozzarella. However, if, for example, somebody has an allergy to tomato which are genetically modified, with this type of representation, you cannot answer, because at one time you will have one type of tomato, and another time you will have another type of tomato, so this is not enough. And that's why we need to go one level deeper. However, if we take SQL databases and we just have to map two levels, SQL databases are very efficient to do that. So now let's try to see and to describe what is a real food supply chain from a technical standpoint. Mainly, it's a supply chain with many levels. And if you go one level under, you know, for the pizza, the dough, the tomato sauce, the dough is going to have different suppliers. It's going to have different types of ingredient with flour, maybe different types of flour, and so on. So you see that the cascading from the dough is going to go one way. Tomato sauce, you can have different recipes, different types of suppliers. Mozzarella, it can be Bufala mozzarella or non-Bufala mozzarella, and so on. So what you see here is that when you look at the supply chain, you have a lot of things that are going to be variables. And we call it the V3 challenge. First, when you go from one food to another, you have a variable numbers of ingredients per level. You have very simple finished products who will have one or two ingredients, or more complex food products who are going to have at the first level 10 ingredients. Typically, you know, the difference between a pizza margherita and a pizza quattro stagione, which is going to have a lot of ingredients. And second, you will have a different number of levels per ingredient. Some ingredients will be nearly a raw material, and some of them are going to make, you know, when you talk about a tomato sauce, if you want to go up to the tomato, you may have to go 3 or 4 levels down to get to the origin of the tomato and know if it's a genetically modified tomato or not. So on each ingredient, on each level, you have a variable number of levels. And at the end, you know, since it's a highly flexible industry in which there is a lot of competition, you also have variable number of suppliers. And these 3 things makes the complexity of a food supply chain, these 3 variables number. Now, let's try to take an example and take this example with a SQL databases. And I want to find all the products that contain tomato because this morning I had an alert on tomato coming from Chile. And I have to figure out what are all my finished products that contain, let's say, tomato from Chile. If I try to do it with the SQL databases, I will have to make a lot of joins, inner joins, figure out all the different levels where the tomato can be in the recipe. And in intermediate products, like the tomato sauce, I have to figure out that this intermediate product, which can be also a finished product, has the tomato at different levels. So the query is very complex. I need to simulate a kind of graph in a SQL database, which is pretty difficult and more difficult when I have to update the recipe of, for example, my pizza, my tomato sauce. And then if suddenly I have all my food products, I have a crisis on a specific ingredient, there's just an issue with the execution time if I have 1 billion nodes with 10,000 users asking similar questions at the same time. So when you try to do this in SQL, you see that these are the challenges that you have to solve. And this is the main reason why we chose the Neo4j technology. If you do the same thing in Neo4j, and I just took an example, a simple example with a Cypher query, you can just write the Cypher query for looking at the finished products containing tomato in 3 lines. You know, you're searching for tomato, any recipe anywhere in the supply chain, and leading to a catalog item, which is a finished product. So you see the query, just to get this information, and going through the whole graph is fairly simple to write, and the burden is on the technology. The burden is not on you, and I refer to SQL when you want to have, you know, make all the joins and things like that, where the burden is first on you and then on the technology. So this language and Cypher suits very well the graph queries and this type of questions that you can have from users. And second thing, instead of trying to optimize yourself the structure of the query or the structure of the database, it's done by the technology. So you focus on your business question, which is finding the finished products that contain tomato, and the technology handles all the difficult aspects of the query. And what we've seen with the Neo4j technology is that it scaled to more than 1 billion nodes. With what we learned in the presentation from Emil this morning, now it seems to be unlimited number of nodes, but probably it's still to be seen and still to be proven, especially when you have very, very complex supply chain. However, being able to handle 1 billion nodes is something, just to give you an example, which could handle all the food products from all the major food companies in the world, you know, including Nestle, Cargill, Kellogg's, you know, all the famous brands that you know. And so, which means that this technology is pretty well suited to this type of question. So now I hand it over to Julian for a demo and showing how it works in real life. Thank you.
Okay, so let's switch back to tomatoes again. Going to, up. All right, so we're talking about a SaaS product, of course. I'm going to log in as that pizza manufacturer we talked about earlier. All right, I'm going to have a look at the products I have. So let's look into our pizza we talked about earlier. Let's pick the pepperoni pizza, for example. So this is the information we have about the pizza. You know, well, the product name, the ingredients, the facilities where you're manufacturing it. It's no new information. I mean, you're manufacturing the pizza, you know that. What might be more interesting is having a look at the ingredients of that pizza. So let's have a look at the tomato sauce, for example. So that tomato sauce comes from a supplier who's located in Belarus, if I'm not mistaken. So we're using computer-generated demo data. So if you see mango coming from Iceland, that's normal, well, in our demo data set at least. So my tomato paste, I'm buying it from that supplier in Belarus. It has 2 ingredients, olive oil and tomato. Let's keep drilling down into the tomato and having a look at where it's coming from exactly. So I've got 4 different sources for the tomato. One of them is Ukraine. And as you can see here, we're starting to really be in the graph. Right before, we only had 2 levels, pepperoni pizza and tomato paste. That was easy in the SQL world. Now what we're having a look at is a real graph with relationship. We are drilling into the supply chain. So for each of the node, for each of the supplier involved in making your products, you can get information about them and know if they are compliant. So for example, we see that the tomato grower based in Ukraine has no certification. You see everything's gray. So you can have a look, whoop, bad luck. So you can have a look at the facility and check if these guys are certified. Let's have a look at these guys instead. See tomato paste suppliers. So they are completely green. They have all their certifications. And if we focus on the facility, we can see exactly where that facility is located on the map and what is the list of their certifications. So these guys have valid environmental certifications. We are sure they are not destroying the environment by growing these tomatoes. They have ethical or social certifications, which is less important in Europe, but in some regions of the world, you really want to make sure there is no child labor involved in making your products. And of course, they have food safety certifications, which guarantees that your food is going to be safe and no bacteria is going to end up on the tomato. So let's get back to our tomato growers over in Ukraine that didn't look very good. They're gray. So as we saw earlier, you can drill down into your supply chain, but you can also search and see how this is impacting your products. So we have that feature here that allows you to view how each product is impacting your own products. So now I can tell that that supplier that was gray, so potentially a risk for me, is impacting 3 of my products. The pepperoni pizza we started talking about, the chicken pad thai, as well as the margarita pizza. And I can take actions on that. So I can contact the suppliers, tell them they should change their source because I'm really not happy with these tomatoes coming from Ukraine. Or I can also communicate with my consumers. And that story is the dark side of the story. How do I react to a bad or negative event? But as you can imagine, with all the data we're collecting, it's pretty easy to communicate with your consumers and tell them, well, all my tomatoes are coming from Spain, for example, or all the meat I'm using in my products is coming from the UK, and I'm sure about that. In terms of keeping your supply chain under control, we have built dashboards that gives you an overview of how visible is your supply chain. So for example, here I've got pretty good visibility on all of my products and also how compliant it is. So as you can see below, you can see if the facilities involved in making your products, your tier 1 facilities, which would be your direct suppliers facilities, and the tier 2+ facilities, which are people you are not directly connected with. For each of these layers, you can see how compliant they are and if they are matching your standards. So let's switch back from the demo to What's special about that? We're not building siloed software. I mean, that's not Nestlé's or Cargill or whoever's software. It's really a social network, which means that everyone has their own private workspace. So in my private workspace, I can manage my products, manage my ingredients, raw materials, and so on. And from that place, I can decide to share it with customers. If I'm asked by a customer, I can share that information and decide how much of it I want to share with them. And I can also invite my suppliers to give me more information. And if we zoom out, each of these cells is really part of a network. So in that example, we see one company that is connected with 6 tier 1 suppliers, and they have more tier 2 suppliers. But you can easily imagine that basically the center of the network could be another dot, for example, the dot on the lower left corner, and you would have the same picture of what's going on around you. So we mentioned at the beginning of that presentation that we're talking about consumer trust. So basically, by mapping that whole supply chain and collecting information at each of the nodes, we're getting information about the quality of the products. We're tracking the information. We can track if something changes in the supply chain. We're getting the country of origin. We can know what is the primary production of each of the ingredients, which allows you to have labels that are really accurate because you're sure of the information. You can track all the ingredients and raw material and identify potentially allergens that would be in your products. And you can collect all the certifications that you need, especially social audits that are very important today. And it kind of all sums up to building and ensuring compliance, transparency, and sustainability throughout your supply chain. And we believe this is exactly what brands need today to build consumer trust. Thank you.